What's going on, you guys? Theo here with the big review, back yet again with another King of Fighters All-Star video, and today we are going to be starting a new series of videos for beginner and intermediate guides on a topic that I get tons of requests for, which is gold border character suggestions. I know there's not a lot of resources out there for new and intermediate players to get this kind of information if they are on a budget or just starting out. So we're going to go ahead and talk about purple fighters today, but before we do, make sure you smash that like button and subscribe. It helps me out a ton as a new YouTuber, and there will be news here at the end of the video, but we're going to start out with the guide. So first character I want to talk about is going to be an older character, but Hihachi is going to increase purple element fighters' attack by 35% and critical rate by 5% with his leadership. But really what you're using Hihachi for is going to be his shock damage as well as his shock explosion. You'll see here that he has shock explosion on his cores, which is very nice. He also has rage mode, which was the exclusive for the Tekken collab characters, but overall, Hihachi is a pretty strong character if you are in need of shock or explosion. I know that in the past I have used him a ton for different Immortal dungeons and things of that nature, and you will definitely get use out of him. I will say that I did consider whether or not I wanted to put him on this list, just because I know that a lot of people did miss out on the Tekken characters because they came out so close to the launch of the game. But with Hihachi, I figured that he definitely deserved to be on here in case people may or may not have had him just kind of laying around in their inboxes and had not gone ahead and built him up. So with Hihachi, his biggest issue is he's kind of squishy, so he's never been a PvP character, nor has he ever been a character that has gotten a ton of attention. But as far as a PvE character, as far as his usefulness is concerned, because of him being able to deal explosion on his core, he is very strong for specific dungeons in the game. So he's actually going to be one of the better shock dealers in the game as well. But his issue, as I said, is he'll deal a lot of damage pretty quickly, but his problem is he's just very squishy without damage immunity of any kind. But overall, if you have Hihachi, he's definitely worth building. I still find myself using mine. So yeah, he's one of those characters that I would definitely recommend for the purple elements. Now, when it comes to these different elements and these different typings, I will say that you'll probably want to, and you're going to notice I'm going to have a lot of attack and defense types in this list, you're probably going to want to stick with defense and attack types for the most part when you're powering these gold borders up, because you're going to need those quite a bit in Reviving Hell's Dungeon. You'll also need balance types, but purple's a little thin on balance, so your mileage may vary. You might want to use a different color for that. But moving on, Lady Asherow is another very, very strong pick, but I don't feel like I need to say a whole lot about her because I feel like most people know Lady Asherow is very strong. She's going to have, again, shock explosion on her cores, and then she's going to deal a ton of shock damage on her various skills. So you'll see here that she has shock damage on her S1. So overall, she's definitely worth it for different dungeons, kind of similar to Hihachi. And then on her S3, you'll see shock damage there as well. And you already saw previously on her cores that she has shock explosion. So overall, Lady Asherow has kind of become a very popular PvE unit for a lot of reasons, and she definitely deserves to be. She's one of the better options for this. She deals very good damage, and overall she's just a very strong character for PvE. And I would highly recommend that you go ahead and use, if you have the AS selection tickets that they sometimes give us, using those for her memories and building her up, because that will be the most reliable way to get her built in a consistent manner. But overall, I definitely have always been a fan of this design overall for a lady fighter as well. I like Lady Asherow, and I kind of always have, but yeah, so I'm glad to see that she has kind of found her niche in the game. I'm sure that eventually she will become outdated, but being that she is a gold border character, and those are kind of at a premium for quality characters, she may or may not have a short shelf life, we'll see. But I think that she has kind of stood the test of time, so to speak, and definitely deserves to be on this list as one of the stronger purple gold border characters. So let's go ahead, speaking of strong purple gold border characters, and talk about yet another collab character, and that is going to be Genjiro. Genjiro is really good overall. Genjiro's issue is he's a tad bit slow, but he's very, very strong. He's almost a mini Fess. So really with Genjiro, he isn't going to get a lot of mileage in different game modes and different Immortal dungeons and so on and so forth. But being that he does have bloodshed on his skills, and being that he is a very strong purple attack type, you can actually use him. And again, remember, if you don't remember back from my Reviving Hell's Dungeon guide, you'll probably not know this, but if it's going to be a situation where you're on a budget and you don't have enough Fess characters to round out an entire team of, say, for instance, in this case, purple characters, then you can go ahead and keep in mind it's an average for your levels for your characters on Reviving Hell's Dungeon. You could go ahead and use him as your third. And as long as the other two characters are going to have high enough levels to average out the total team level to wherever you're at, then you can actually use him at his full potential damage-wise, and he'll get you through the dungeon and do a very good job for you. So I do think that if you have him, he's definitely worth considering. He'll especially come in handy being the fact that he is a purple attack type. So overall, I would say that he's definitely worth the investment if you have him, but I wouldn't say he's going to be a character you're going to take all the way to A5 or anything like that. He's just going to be a character that you might use in the first, I would say probably through the 20s and the 30s, and then once you get into the 40s, you'll probably kind of cast him aside, which can be said about any of these characters. Really, gold border characters in general are placeholders in a way, unless they're filling a specific role for a specific dungeon, so that can be said about any of these characters. But yeah, with Genjiro, he's just going to be a very strong damage dealer overall. You're really not going to use him for much outside of that, but he's a very good character in general. So moving on here to Halloween Party Kula. She's probably the oldest character on this list, or at least close to it. With her, she's decent. Her biggest thing is she's just going to have chill, which is nice. So whenever you're able to freeze characters, that's going to be beneficial to you in certain game modes. And she is very strong in those modes that call for it. The problem is she doesn't have a ton of sources for the freeze, so it's just one of those things where you're probably not going to want to use her for many things outside of very niche uses. But she is a very strong character in those positions where she is going to be able to kind of spam out her freeze when she's awakened and get the job done for you in that regard. But I would say she's kind of more another one that's built to be replaced very soon. But she is still pretty good. You know, for a character as old as her, for a character that's been around as long as she has, I would say that you could do worse. You know, the Kulas in general, they tend to have quite a bit of usefulness just because they do all tend to have the freeze on their kit. She doesn't have it on much outside of, I believe it's just her S3, but overall, she's a good character. It just comes down to the fact that there are going to be better options kind of as your account grows, so I wouldn't kind of take her very high unless you're trying to score high in a specific dungeon, at which point your mileage may vary yet again, and that's up to you. But I do think that she is easily replaceable at this point. She's starting to get outdated, but still, to this day, for people who are trying to be on a budget with their characters and just get through this content as fast as possible, they may consider going for her, building her up to wherever they need to get her to, and she'll get the job done. But she's just a steady character. I'm not going to say or oversell that she's anything super special, but speaking of characters that are special, Rimaruru, I think, is kind of underrated and overlooked. A lot of people don't realize that if you need a character with freeze, she is going to be one of the stronger picks when it comes to PvE content. You'll see here that she's going to have increases active skill damage dealt to frozen and chilled enemies by 40%, which is huge. And really with her kit, she's everything that the previous Kula was, but better. So you'll see here she's going to deal chill damage equal to 30% of attack to the target every 1 second for 7 seconds upon landing a skill. She's going to have super armor when using a skill on her S2. And then if you move on and you look at her skills, she is got a kind of mini ice coffin skill. So she's pretty good. She's pretty good. Being able to freeze the enemy with her S3 for 1.6 seconds is also huge. Her biggest problem, in my opinion, is her cooldowns are a little high on her skills, so you're definitely going to want to stack cooldown reduction on her. But she's going to be very beneficial for you for specific instances in the game where you will need freeze. So, as you'll see there, that's kind of her mini, that's her S1, kind of her mini Ice Coffin in a way. Definitely nowhere near as good as Ice Coffin, but you'll see the similarities just visually there. But she's a very good character. I don't think a lot of people really pay attention to her, if I'm being honest. But you will, if you ever kind of just look up on YouTube how to get through some of these dungeons that require freeze, a lot of people that score very highly will use her, and for good reason. The only reason I don't personally use her as much is because, unfortunately, I was not lucky enough to get her card. I just kept getting nothing but Genjiro cards and Halmaro. So it was just, it was a mess when that collab was around for me. But yeah, if you need a good purple freeze gold border character, she is wonderful. So definitely highly recommend her. And she's actually pretty decent, half decent at PvP too. So you can use her for that, and she's a defense type, which defense types get called for a ton in RHD. So, speaking of defensive types, we're going to talk about a kind of real budget option, and that's Seth. So, Seth is interesting. He's very unique. So, with Seth, the biggest selling point with him is he has the ability to reset all of his skills on most of his skills, which is kind of cool. He's almost like a walking Leah. Very interesting with the way his kit works. Now, unfortunately, he doesn't have a whole lot going for him outside of that. So really, when it comes to Seth, you're just going to kind of use him sparingly, I would suppose. As you'll see here, he has a 30% chance to reset his cooldowns on his S1, 50% chance to reset his cooldowns on his S2. So yeah, his kit's very interesting. And then he has fairly decent cooldowns on his skills as well. But with him, I would say that you're mainly going to just be using him as a real tight budget option, and the deeper we get into these suggestions, that's kind of what it's going to become. Now, we still do have some top quality gold border characters to talk about, but with him I felt like he was worth mentioning because I didn't want this to be all collab characters for people. Otherwise, I knew I was going to get people saying, well, what about us, those of us in this collabs? And if you miss collabs, I do have to be honest with you and say, you can only cut this so deep, right? Like, so with these gold border characters, they're really not meant for endgame content in general, and that should go without saying. So if I can't include most of these being collab characters, it makes it tough to make suggestions. That's why I was kind of back and forth, to be honest, on whether or not I was going to include a ton of collab characters, because I knew people missed out on those various collabs various times, and that there were players that have come in since. But really, when it comes to making these suggestions, I can't in good conscience or good faith not include them, nor can I sit here and tell you that there's a ton of just normal pool characters that are gold border that are going to get you through this content. But he's a decent one, definitely probably worth it. I've used him quite a bit back when there was another infinite battle mode in the game, but not so much anymore. But moving on to Becky Lynch. Becky Lynch, another collab character, but Becky gets used quite a bit in PVE, and for a good reason. She has a ton of bleed damage, and she also has bleed explosion when landing a critical hit. So overall, Becky is actually really, really good for PVE. A lot of people I know really like using her for different dungeons, so if you're one of those people that got her and didn't realize that she was worth building, I would definitely recommend doing so if you have the ability to do it. But you'll see here that she's going to stun the target for 1.8 seconds when attacking a bleeding enemy. She's going to have bleed damage on her S2, and then she's also going to have bleed damage on her S3. So she's very strong for bleed damage, and a lot of people use her as kind of a battery position on their different Immortal dungeon runs that require bleed, or just different PvE runs in general that require bleed. So if you're somebody who sees her on teams and wonders why people use her, that's for that reason. It has a lot to do with just the fact that she has a really good bleed explosion. So yeah, I would highly recommend her if you have her. If you missed out on her, then obviously there's going to be other options for bleed damage out there. But as far as the purple pool is concerned, she's actually going to be one of the better options I go over in this video. Like I said, I'm not going to be tiering these characters at all. This is in no way, shape, or form in any sort of order, and this isn't even a comprehensive list. However, I would say that it's fairly close to being the latter, because there aren't a ton of options out there that are going to get you through a lot of these things or be super useful. And really, it comes down to just making the determination at the end of the day that these characters are going to be built to be replaced, and kind of keeping that in mind, unless they are filling, like I said, a specific niche role on a team for a specific dungeon. So moving on to a super budget option, Athena in Wonderland is actually really good for damage. She isn't really good for much else, but she's a good damage dealer. If you're somebody that just is starting out and needs a budget option to get you through, maybe it's story mode, or maybe it's, some of the lower tier difficulty PVE dungeons, then she'll definitely help you out, just based solely upon the fact that she does deal quite a bit of damage. So I would say that if you pull her, or if you are starting out and you have maybe an AS selector ticket, if she's in there, go ahead and pull her, because she will do decent damage. I would say she's definitely not worth picking over like a Lady Asherow in that scenario, but she is a pretty strong character. And like I said, this is another one of those characters that isn't going to be getting you a lot of mileage, because as you'll see on her skills, she doesn't have a lot going on in her kit, so she's just there to be a general damage dealer for maybe mobs or bosses for kind of a new player. But she is a good damage dealer. She's pretty strong in that role, and still to this day, I've seen people that are newer kind of use her and build her up, which is definitely, that's not a problem. Just don't overly invest into her, because she is easily replaceable down the line. However, I will say, if you're a fan of Athena, until the Athena, I believe the new Athena should be coming out probably next week after Goro's rate up is gone off the unified banner as of the recording of this video. So if you're somebody that's a big fan of Athena, then you'll probably be getting her soon. However, this one, if you're a fan, probably worth the investment. If you're starting out and you just want to kind of play with your favorite character, I know there's a lot of fans of her, probably not for anything to do with that reason right there, but yeah, so I digress. I feel like I've talked about Athena a ton on this channel in the past couple weeks. I guess it has more to do with the fact that we've had these data mines, and then we have this new Athena roulette, and recently Athena 2000 added into the unified banner, but yeah, a lot of Athena love in this game I've noticed, so this dev team must be a fan, but I know she's popular with the fan base as well. However, I will say that maybe we could slow down after the next one. So, just maybe just a suggestion, Netmarble. Maybe start focusing on other characters for a little bit. But yeah, so seems like every few months we get a new Athena version somewhere. So anyway, the last character that I want to talk about here is actually not in my roster, and that is because she's fairly new and I have not gotten her yet, but we've already talked about her recently, and that's Athena 2000. So this Athena is pretty good. We've already talked about it. Actually, she's one of the better options, I think, outside of kind of the characters that are filling specific roles for their dot damage. So if you're just looking for a good generalist, she's pretty good. Her power charge rate is pretty nice. Her leadership skills really nice. She deals shock damage, which is really nice as well. So her kit overall, you can tell she's a newer gold border character because she is built a lot stronger than some of these older ones. I would say that, if you need a gold border character and you're just starting out, definitely make sure that you're doing the ads for her roulette and going for the bingos with her souls so that you can get her. I think that a new player would get a lot of use out of her. You'll see there that her projectile is actually much faster than the previous Athena we showed, and overall her kit is just a lot more stacked, whereas Athena in Wonderland kind of has a bare bones kit, so to speak. This Athena actually is very, very strong as far as her versatility. So actually, out of all of these gold border characters, she's one of the stronger ones that I would recommend to you guys. So yeah, that is going to be just my suggestions, a handful of suggestions for gold border characters for the purple element. We'll talk about a different element in a later video, but that's all I wanted to throw in today. So let's go ahead and take a look at the leak for the shop for the New Year's event. So you'll see here that we are going to be getting kind of a weak selection of items. Now, I will say that Mai is not bad at all. She's actually a particularly good striker for certain dungeons in the game, so for those of you who are needing a striker with some pretty good burn damage, she's actually really good for that. So things like your guild raid, you'll actually kind of be using her here and there for your team comps. So that part isn't too bad. You do get some capsules in there, but outside of those two things, really not anything too special about this. So I would say that it's worth it if you don't have that Mai to go ahead and pick her up and maybe get a memory or two, but that's really up to you at that point. But I would definitely suggest getting her. You will see, by the way, I wanted to go ahead and put this clip in here somewhere, but Orochi, I think, is probably my favorite character to put into PvEAI. He's just kind of ridiculous. It's just funny bullying things with him, so I figured it would be fun to put that in there while I talked about that, since it was kind of just a little tidbit of information I wanted to make sure I covered. But anyway, let's go ahead and talk about the King of Fighters 14, which is not King of Fighters 15. It's a year behind from the timeline, but yeah, basically they announced today via Twitter that there was going to be an Ultimate Edition for King of Fighters 14 coming out later in the month. It looks like it's going to be a digital version of the game, but it's going to come with all the DLC, which is going to include the characters, which will be shown here in the trailer, and then it'll also include the DLC costumes, as well as some themes for your PS4. So looking like this will be a digital download. For those of you who have not played King of Fighters 14, then this is probably going to end up hopefully being a good deal, as long as they don't try to charge you the full $60 price tag. Like I've said, King of Fighters 15, regardless of the memeing on it, does exist. It's going to happen at some point. But, you know, with this one, hopefully with that on the horizon, it is not a full $60 price tag game, which I doubt it will be, but there is no price announced with this, so I will update you guys whenever that happens. But King of Fighters 14 is a good game. I'm not a big fan of the art direction they went with this one. It's a tough sell for me when it comes to kind of 3D graphics for King of Fighters. I'm kind of a purist with that, but I'm not saying that I wouldn't accept it if it were an art style I enjoyed, but this one was kind of hit or miss for me. But the game itself was great, so yeah, overall, one of those things where, you know, if you haven't played this game yet, then I would definitely recommend maybe picking it up this way. But it's going to be a PS4 copy that you can pick up digitally, and it'll have all your DLC associated with it. Still no information whatsoever. They've been pretty mum as far as updating us on what's going on with the King of Fighters 15 as far as the delays go with the trailer. I'm assuming that, being that it sounds like with the COVID situation in Japan, they're going to be going into another lockdown. It's sounding like that is potentially the issue, although I would say that I don't know what that has necessarily to do with a trailer being dropped on a social media platform. But hey, you know, I don't understand how these business things work in the background, so could just be that, but we will find out. Time will tell, but you'll see the themes there. So yeah, right now this is kind of a palate wetter for them to kind of maybe try and give us something until they can get around to figuring out a date and time for the trailer drop. So here's to hoping that when King of Fighters 15 does get announced, that it pleases us all and it's worth the wait. But you'll see here the general information as far as release dates for the 14 Ultimate Edition. It's going to be January 20th of this year, so that is pretty much going to be it for me today, guys. I just wanted to make sure I dropped this information in here for you all. We did, for those of you who didn't notice, hit the 400 subscriber mark today after talking about it yesterday, so I greatly appreciate all of you. If you haven't already done so, make sure you hit the like button, share, and subscribe. There's tons of awesome videos and content coming here in the near future that I'm working on. But until then, I'll talk to you guys in the next one. Peace.